I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Hi, Kiki.
Hi, Tuesday.
Well, last week we talked about a superhero. This time we're talking also about a superhero, but not a Marvel hero. One of the rare superheroes that Disney doesn't have for Marvel.
Yeah.
And a superhero made before they even thought about buying Marvel. I mean, Marvel really was not, this was 1991. Marvel was not really the MCU was only a dream in someone's eye at the time.
I don't even think it was that. I'm not even sure anybody had really had the idea.
All we had was a rubber suit Captain America with rubber ears and a fantastic movie that was shelved.
Yeah, at least as far as Marvel properties went. We'd had the Tim Burton Batman.
Yeah, this one's one of those movies that kind of came out as a result of the popularity of the Tim Burton Batman. Every studio worth their weight was taking any hero, any comic book hero, any comic strip character that they could get the rights to and making movies out of them. We're talking about the Rocketeer, but you also have Dick Tracy, the Shadow, the Phantom, the Mask. There was even a Brenda Starr movie, which also stars someone that's in this movie.
It was that weird time period in the late 80s, early 90s where the Michael Keaton Batman had proven that, yeah, the rare comic book movie could make bank, but the prevailing attitude was that, in general, comic book movies were not marketable.
Until, 1999 Blade. But we're far from that at this point.
Yeah. So the idea of the Rocketeer, I think it was years after I first saw this movie that I even knew it was based on a comic book.
Yeah, the comic book came out in 1982. Disney actually picked up film rights a year later, kind of sat on it. And then Batman came out and said, well, we got to do our own superhero movies. Who do we own? Oh, we own this 80s comic book that was a tribute to 30s comics. Let's make a movie out of it. In the 30s, it's very pulp in this movie. It's very, it's Indiana Jones as a superhero, but though some people will say Indiana Jones is already a superhero.
Yeah, it was the original comic was kind of taken off of a lot of those 1930s serials, which also was the inspiration for Indiana Jones we talked about in our Indiana Jones episode. So it takes a lot, especially the look, takes a lot from things like Commando Cody. The original comic was a little bit more adult oriented. So it was a little bit more violent, I'm given to believe.
Like the OG Ninja Turtle comics back in the day?
I don't think it was that over the top, but I'm given to understand, I don't know a lot about the original comics, but it was one of those imprints. It was originally Pacific Comics, so it was an indie comics things. It's still owned by IDW now, but it was a more independent publishing idea, and one of the major changes when Disney got a hold of it was definitely in the character Jennifer Connelly ends up playing, which is the girlfriend of our hero. It is my understanding that in the original comic, she was based directly off of Betty Page.
Oh yeah, you can tell in the way they made her hair look in this movie. I was going to mention that. Yeah.
Well, no, what I mean is in the comic, she is directly based off of Betty Page, as in she
Pin-up?
is like a pin-up nude model. And all of that was removed, and she's made a very naive, bubbly ingenue who's trying to break into acting and is perhaps not gifted with much gray matter in the skull. You know? She's very childlike innocent instead of, like I said, my understanding of the comic, I've not actually read the original Rocketeer comics, but my understanding is that she was more worldly wise, adult woman, who was very Betty Page, very assured in her sexuality, very, you know. Mm-hmm. And Disney got a hold of the property and was like, oh, wow, kids would love to buy a toy of a guy in a rocket suit. Make it basically bloodless and something cute girlfriend, and, you know, tone it down a lot.
Disney-fy it.
Yeah, and so it really got the Disney treatment in all of the kind of sad, saccharine, you know.
And this was originally a touch-tone movie. They could have gone further if they wanted to.
Well, yes, and apparently it was Katzenberg's idea. He was still working at the studio at the time, and it is my understanding that Katzenberg was like, this would make for good toys. Let's do it under the Walt Disney Pictures brand.
And then they never made the toys.
And then, yeah, then somebody dropped the ball or something, and it was never the toy line.
The movie bombed, and then they never made the toys.
So, yeah, all of the Disneyfication that happened to the film perhaps was not required, and it might have done a little better if they'd have aged it up a little.
Again, this is coming off just a few years after that Tim Burton Batman, which really held nothing back. To go to this movie, which by the definition of being a Disney film is holding back.
Yeah, it really is kind of an interesting thing. I think that if they'd had, you know, I hate the term edgy, and I'm not really a fan of dark and edgy, but you can go colorful and edgy. And I will remind you that this director who did The Rocketeer is the same director that when the MCU got started, they pulled in for Captain America: The First Avenger. So you want to talk about a guy who knows superheroes and Nazi punching, they'd bring him back to do that again.
And they kind of let him do whatever he wanted.
Yeah, and by that point, yeah, they were like, you know, hey, put a little bit of an edge onto it. And I'm not saying that that's like a really adult film or anything, but
it wasn't holding back.
It's not the kind of, you know, if you compare those two films side by side, it is still a wholesome film, but Captain America seems so much more adult authentic compared to the Rocketeer.
I was going to say authentic.
Like, yeah, it does.
There's parts of this movie that doesn't feel authentic, if that makes sense to anyone, you know?
Yeah, and I want to be clear here that I don't think either of us wish to knock The Rocketeer as a film.
Disney actually put a little love to this movie, because last year when they did Disney Plus Day, and they did those one-day releases of Disney films, this was one of those films that got shown in theaters for that one day. So, and the movie does have its fans. It's a cult classic is probably the best way to describe this movie over the years. So there's people within Disney that do have the love for this movie, and it kind of does deserve it. I just wish that they were allowed to take the gloves off and really go as far as they could. It doesn't have to be an R rating. You could still have PG-13. Again, Touchstone Pictures usually did that. You could have gone that extra bit instead of pulling back and saying, we're going to release this under the Walt Disney banner. They got a pretty good cast for this. However, the director had to fight tooth and nail for our star to be here. Apparently, the higher-ups wanted a more seasoned actor, a more famous actor. But we get Billy Campbell as our hero, Cliff Secord, the Rocketeer.
Yeah, the interesting thing is I had forgotten that he is the one who played the Rocketeer. And since this film, he had gone on to play the primary villain in one of my favorite TV shows, and that's how he stuck in my brain, personally. Mm-hmm. I do not remember him as the Rocketeer. I remember him as the villain from the 4400. In the original 4400, because they've remade the series now, he played Jordan Collier, who is a guy who starts a cult and is the kind of main villain of the series. It's a really good show. You should go watch it. In my brain, he's that guy. He's like the evil villain dude with superpowers.
So to see the evil dude with superpowers play the good guy with a rocket.
Yeah, and so, you know, he's like 15 years older or whatever by the time of that series, and he's got kind of a scruffy beard and, you know, all that kind of stuff. He's really smarmy. And that's how he stuck in my brain. But the interesting thing is for people who watch Star Trek, and this is going to come up a lot in this movie, for people who watch Star Trek, you might have remembered him as the outrageous Okona in the episode of the same title, which, if you don't remember the episode, that's the episode where Data does stand-up. So yeah, there's an episode where Data tries to do stand-up, but the A plot to that episode features Billy Campbell and also Terry Hatcher before she got famous. So, but yeah, interestingly, he was also up for the part of Commander Riker. He, of course, lost that out to Jonathan Frakes, but they remembered him enough to bring him back for that role. But yeah, in here as the Rocketeer. So when I started up and I was like, wait a minute, that's who played the Rocketeer? He'd also been on Dynasty and in the Tales of the City as well. Interesting career he has had. Still working, but of course I name dropped her before, but playing our love interest here, Jenny, is Jennifer Connelly.
Jennifer playing Jenny.
Yeah. And they
do
changed
make her
name from the comic, because in the comic I do believe she's named Betty because she was supposed to be, you know, Betty Page.
But they give her the Betty Page hairstyle in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of a common, popular hairstyle at the time, so yeah. But yeah, I mean, come on. You know Jennifer Connelly, she was in Labyrinth. You don't need to know anything more about her. Honestly. No, we talked about her more when we talked about her doing the the voice of the assistant Karen in Spider-Man Homecoming. Yeah, no, she is adorable here for what she gets, and sadly that is not a lot because of the way they changed the character, but we will get into that later.
They seem to be playing up something because they call her Lady Luck, and that does sound like a potential hero name in the future.
I mean, you know, if there had ever been a sequel, maybe we'd have gotten into that. Who knows?
Who knows?
But I doubt it because I don't think they were terribly that interested. What I know about most of the versions of this film script that came across the desk is they kept making her just a damsel in distress. Apparently there had to be many rewrites to get as good of a character as we got for her. They rewrote it to that level is what it seems to be. Apparently all of the original ones were even less for her, which is kind of just, I'm going to say it, so much cringe. Just, ugh. Our kind of sidekick to the hero here is played by Alan Arkin, who is another one of those that has just had such a long career that where do you even start? But recently he did a series called Kaminsky Method for Netflix. Also, he's been on BoJack Horseman recently, also for Netflix. Just before this was made, he had just come off of doing Edward Scissorhands, but probably one of the things that got him most acclaim for his film career was he got the Oscar for Little Miss Sunshine. The interesting thing, though, I will say, is in the casting of our villain, because they went through a couple of people before we got to the actor that we ended up on, because the villain part, Neville Sinclair, our dashing British actor here, they offered it to Jeremy Irons, apparently, at first, and he turned it down. And then they offered it to Charles Dance, and he also turned it down. So who we ended up getting was Timothy Dalton.
Yeah, Timothy Dalton, one of the many James Bonds.
Yeah, one of the many James Bonds. He had been, I do believe, the most recent James Bond at the point.
And I'll bring it up. He was in that Brenda Starr movie. Yeah.
That's who you were talking about earlier, the Brenda Starr movie. But there is the bit, you know, they needed the kind of dashing British actor who could also kind of be villainous, but they wanted his villainy to be a bit of a surprise, I think. So
I mean, they have him do some dialogue that he's only doing this against his will, and it's like it's not his choice to doing the bad stuff. And then when we finally get the truth revealed, he goes full mustache twirling waha villain.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, I think having the look, James Bond is a spy but evil is kind of an interesting twist. I'm not sure if it would have worked the same way if you'd had Jeremy Irons or Charles Dance, because even at the time, both of them were kind of more known for just kind of outright villain parts.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Timothy Dalton at the time was Bond. So at the time the film premiered, it was, you know, slightly against type, although the film does tip its hand very early. You know, it's not super twist, because, you know, you find out like 2 scenes in or whatever that he's working with the bad guys. But the twist that, like, not only is he a bad guy, but also a Nazi, you know, is a little more of a twist. Another kind of interesting one, this cast is full of, like, interesting character actors and stuff, especially if you watch a lot of genre television. But we get playing a fictionalized version of Howard Hughes here, played by Terry O'Quinn, who, if you watched the Lost TV series, he played John Locke in that. It's funny to see him here with hair. But yeah. Also, I mean, again, if you watch Star Trek, he was in the Next Generation episode The Pegasus, as Riker's old captain who takes them on a dangerous mission. But yeah, it's kind of cool to see him here. Interestingly, you want to talk about Marvel connections. They were going to try to put the Rocketeer, the character, in the What If series on Disney Plus. He was going to be in the
Captain Carter episode?
Yeah, the first episode about Captain Carter. But the thing that kept them from putting the character into the MCU, strangely, it's not the fact that this is not a Marvel character, because I guess Disney just doesn't care anymore. It was the fact that Howard Stark and Howard Hughes are too much alike. Probably because, you know, Howard Stark was pulled from Howard Hughes, you know, but they thought that might confuse people.
I mean, it's not like Disney doesn't still own the rights to the character. Like, not long ago, they did a Rocketeer series for their Disney Junior brand.
Someone needs to save the day. Rocketeer to the rescue. A villain standing in your way. Rocketeer to the rescue.
So they still have rights to the character. Billy Campbell actually returned to do the voice of Cliff for that series.
One of the henchmen that is working with our villain, the mobster Eddie Valentine, gets played by Paul Sorvino. Another one of those actors that's just been in everything.
Always playing a gangster, though.
Well, I was going to say, well, not always, but then I remembered, yes, in that movie they made him a gangster too, because I was going to say one of the things our generation remembers him most for is he was in the Baz Luhrmann Romeo plus Juliet, where he played Papa Capulet, and I was going to say, well, he's not always a gangster, but then I remembered, yeah, Baz Luhrmann just made them gangsters in that film. But yeah, he was in Goodfellas, and his IMDb page is just so long. And again, if you watch Star Trek, you'll remember him as Nikolai Rozhenko. You know, so he's related to Worf there by adoption, of course. This is the If You Watch Star Trek episode. Talking about all of the character actors you know and love. This movie is full of them. Let's just run down the list real quick here, who we can fit in. We get appearances by William Sanderson, who I think a lot of people will remember best as, "Hi, I'm Larry, and this is my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl." So if you watch Newhart, you'll remember him. He was also on Deadwood, and he was the sheriff on True Blood. So, but he's one of those character actors that was in everything. He was in everything. So he retired from acting back in 2020. We also get the wonderful Margot Martindale, who is, again, another one of those actors who's in just everything. I loved her on Dexter and her turn on The Americans. But she's in this as the woman who runs the cafe they're always hanging out in. And we get a very short cameo from Clint Howard in
This
this.
is like the fifth or sixth movie we've talked about that Clint Howard has been in.
Yeah, Clint Howard has been in everything. Once again, if you watch Star Trek. But yeah, again, if you watch Star Trek, the gangster that steals the briefcase that contains the rocket at the beginning of the film is played by Max Grodenchik, who people will best remember as Quark's brother Rom in Deep Space Nine. And the guy who plays Lothar, the very, very tall henchman in here, was played by an actor who was also on a lot of Star Trek. And he played the character of Meherdu, which was the Grand Negus's servant that always followed him around. Tiny Ron was his name, but Tiny Ron and Max Grodenchik worked together a lot on Deep Space Nine, so it's funny to see them have a little scene here.
And again, he's under a lot of makeup.
And again, he is under a lot of makeup because they've tried to make him look like a Dick Tracy villain. Yeah. They've tried to get that same kind of look. But
trying a little too hard for that transfer from page to screen.
Yeah, but it is kind of interesting seeing him here. But yeah, so it is funny to see Tiny Ron and Max Grodenchik in a completely different context.
The makeup they put on the makeup they put on Tiny Ron makes it very hard for him to emote. Because you even when he's talking, I don't know if that's his voice or not. Like you can't see his lips enunciate because it's rah, 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 rah. Whatever prosthetic they put on his face.
I have no idea if that's like how intentional that was, but it is kind of interesting. The other one that I kind of wanted to mention is the club singer with the band that's in the restaurant they keep going to, that Timothy Dalton keeps taking Jennifer Connelly to, is played by Melora Hardin, and probably her best known role is on The Office, where she played the character of Jan. She was also in Monk, the TV series Monk, where she played Trudy. The interesting thing to me is that she's the daughter of Jerry Hardin, who played Deep Throat in the X-Files. So I had never watched The Office or Monk. So I didn't know who she was until she appeared on Dancing with the Stars recently. And she had brought on her parents at one point, and she was like, "Oh, and here's my dad. His name is Jerry." And I was like, "Wait, what?" It's like, so that was really cool. But she's got a beautiful voice, and she's the singer in this. It's such a weird and interesting cast in this, because it's everybody in this is just kind of like, wait a minute, I know you from like 12 other things.
This whole cast is filled with it. Hey, it's that guy.
Yeah. So.
And then we do get you mentioned a fictionalized version of Howard Hughes. We also get fictionalized versions of Clark Gable and W.C. Fields. The guy who plays W.C. Fields, flawless impression, by the way.
Yeah, I will say that as far as fictionalized versions of people, I do want to mention where our villain comes from in this, because the character of Neville Sinclair, as he's called in this, comes from a very interesting place. He's based very obviously off of Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling movie star from old Hollywood films. But the bizarre thing is that there was one guy who wrote a biography of Errol Flynn after his death. This guy, his name was Charles Hyam, wrote this biography of Errol Flynn that was like, oh, and now the secret story of Errol Flynn that you never knew. And he basically was like, oh yeah, Errol Flynn was a Nazi spy. That whole time he was just a spy for the Germans. And it was like this huge bombshell biography. And the thing is that there's no real evidence for this. And Errol Flynn's family tried to sue the guy, and the publisher, like they tried to sue over the book. It was dismissed because apparently a dead person can't be libeled. I don't know if they've ever changed that, but apparently at the time, that was the law. The thing is that the guy said, like, no, I totally talked to somebody who worked in British intelligence, and they said they saw Errol Flynn's file, and like British intelligence totally knew he was a spy. And eventually they got the guy to say that he never actually saw the files himself, and he was just trusting the word of somebody who says they saw some paperwork or what. And basically nobody's ever been able to
prove or disprove it. Or disprove it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's never been disproven, but if you come out and you're like, hey, you did a thing, kind of on you to prove that. Anyway, that is basically where we got the idea of this guy in this movie. Like, okay, well, what if that were actually true? What if there was this Errol Flynn-like guy, you know, this dashing Hollywood star who actually was working for the Nazis? Now, the idea of Howard Hughes being like, oh, he's working on a rocket jetpack or whatever. Well, I mean, he did work on a lot of experimental aircraft.
They even play into that at the climax of the movie, where Cliff is flying on one of Hughes's models, and he'll say, "It will fly."
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. He did do some work with the War Production Board, which was a part of the U.S. government. It wasn't technically part of the military, but it was part of the U.S. government that was trying to, you know, new technologies in connection with the war effort. Did he ever work on a rocket pack? I don't know that for certain, but yeah. So it is kind of interesting to have him here in the film, portrayed kind of in that way.
Yeah. So let's get into the story here. So, like you said, as you said, Howard Hughes is working on this experimental jetpack, and we find out later in the movie that the Germans are also working on a similar experimental jetpack that doesn't work. That they can never get it to fly without exploding. And there's this really, really well animated propaganda film that they show where the plan is to arm all of their soldiers with jetpacks and just take over the United States. Make it one huge land of white supremacists. Yeah.
Uncomfortable.
At least it was animated well. I mean, this was Disney working on it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Neville Sinclair sends the Valentine gang to steal the rocket from Howard Hughes. As this is happening, we have Cliff, who is a stunt pilot, flying his new stunt craft because he's trying to get into what they call the National Air Show performances. I mean, that's kind of what he does. That's his bread and butter. He's a stunt pilot. That's what he does. So it's a situation of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, as he ends up in the middle of a shootout between the Valentine gang, the cops, and the feds. And the plane is totaled. It's shot at. It is completely totaled by the time it lands. There goes Nationals.
Yeah, and the little henchman here, Wilmer, who is in possession of the briefcase carrying the rocket.
The only member of the Valentine gang to survive the shootout.
Yeah. He crashes into the airplane hangar and has the quick thinking to ditch the rocket in the cockpit of one of the planes and replace it instead with a vacuum cleaner before crashing the car into a gasoline truck and exploding the car and the vacuum cleaner to distract the feds. The feds, not really knowing what the rocket ever looked like, they think, oh, well, this hunk of metal we've retrieved, that certainly looks sort of like a rocket melted from the flames. All right, well, it was destroyed. Let's all go home, boys.
So yeah, so as far as Howard Hughes is concerned, the rocket is lost until he actually gets the rubble and said, "Hey, unfortunately, this vacuum cleaner will never clean again."
Well, yeah, it doesn't hit them though until after they see a guy flying around with the rocket pack.
Yeah. So Cliff finds the rocket in his plane. They realize this must have been what the feds were after. Since their stunt plane is destroyed, they need a new gimmick to get into the stunt show so they can make some money. So Cliff decides, I'm going to wear this jetpack. I'm going to make it part of my stunt show and make some money. PD, his mechanic, saying, they're looking for this thing. If you go out there with this thing on your back, they're going to think you stole it. They're going to come for us.
And he's not wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only one in the world. Once people see it, that's the news is going to start spreading. There is, when he uses it at the stunt show to save another friend,
pilot.
Yeah, another friend gets into danger by trying to pilot an old plane. It's a really weird setup, it's like, for reasons his friend gets into an old plane while possibly drunk or something to try to save Cliff's job, because if he doesn't fly, then he's out of the show or something, whatever. But Cliff has to go save him or else he's gonna die, and he has to put on the rocket and, blah, blah, blah. But because it was a big regional stunt show or whatever, there's film cameras there to get newsreel footage. And so they do capture film of him saving this guy with the rocket pack.
And the news dubs him the Rocketeer.
Yeah. And of course there's newspaper reporters and all that kind of stuff, which does lead to the funniest line, and also the line that makes you kind of hate the screenwriter the most, which is later on in the film when he finally reveals his identity to his girlfriend, and he says, you know, I'm the Rocketeer, and he expects this big reaction, and she's like, the Rock of what now? And he
Don't
says,
you watch the news?
Don't you read the papers? And she says, well, I've been working all day.
And that's the thing they put in the trailer. Because that's the one thing I do remember was in the original trailer was that scene. I'm the Rocketeer. The Rock of what now?
Yeah, and I'm thinking like, well, it's been like 3 days or whatever, and you got fired from the film, and also you're an extra, and extras on films mostly just kind of stand around. As
people, you know, we know people who are extras on films.
Yeah, we know people who are just kind of professional extras, so you know, we know how that goes. But it's like, yeah, you would have just been like reading the paper and discussing the day's news with the other extras next to the craft service table. Like, come on. When they really get into the idea of, all right, there's something going on here, and we gotta use the rocket for just a little bit to get a little bit of money. We're going to keep it hidden who we are because we know somebody's going to come looking for this thing. At first, they just think it's the feds. They don't realize that there's gangsters looking for them. They decide to keep it a secret who they are, so we get our nice superhero, you know, hidden identity. And we get the romance side plot here that Cliff has his girlfriend Jenny, who is just gotten a small role, or she's just auditioned for a role in Sinclair's film, and she hopes it's going to be the part of the princess or whoever who gets to say the romantic line and have the romantic kiss with the lead. But we discover when we see her on her first day on set that, you know, she's just the extra, because even though everybody knows she had the best line reading, the producer's niece or somebody also wanted a part. So even though she is just the worst actress and keeps screwing up take after take, she got the part because, well, you know, producer's niece or whatever.
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
That's what they keep saying. This
actually goes into the part of I guess you call it the B plot, the love story between Cliff and Jenny, is that Cliff doesn't really like the idea of Jenny being an actor, and Jenny really wants Cliff to do more than just stunt flying, and that seems to be their argument in their relationship. Like, you know, when Jenny finds out that Cliff was in a crash, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, everyone knew because they were at the airport and you weren't. And Jenny is just like, I'm working on my career. I want to be an actor. This is what I want to do. So yeah, Cliff is kind of a D-bag for part of this movie and kind of shutting down Jenny's dream of being an actor.
Yeah, he doesn't particularly treat her all that well. We don't really see where he's that great of a boyfriend.
But he carries her picture around. He kisses the picture every time he goes on the flight. I mean, it's Peavy that pretty much says, what is it that you want? What's more important to you? Because if you let that girl go, it's going to be your fault. Even when they agree that they're going to give the rocket back to the feds, he straight up says, I got to use the rocket one more time because if anything happens to her, I won't forgive myself for it. He seems to actually have genuine love for Jenny. He just seems to not really support her dream of being an actor, which is very weird.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's kind of, we're told that they're in love, but we're never actually shown that they're doing anything for each other. She never particularly shows up for him. I mean, she's got a job and everything, so you can say, she was on set or whatever, but there's, once or twice that she kind of gets fired and maybe she's not working or whatever, so where is she? They have one or two dates, I guess, but for most of the movie, she's just kind of not around. He does show up to the set at one point to see her.
And knocks the set down.
But that it's a closed set. So we know that she didn't invite him because she would have understood that it was a closed set and that you can't have people come visit you. So he just found out where she was working.
Snuck onto the set.
And snuck onto the set to tell her about what was going on in his life.
And almost kills one of the actors.
Yeah.
Because they're filming a fight scene, the set comes down, and Sinclair accidentally stabs his co-star. Why are they using real pointy swords? Who cares? I don't know.
Well, even if you're using a blunted sword, if there is actually any metal involved, I mean, go get a butter knife out of your kitchen. It's still made out of metal. It's blunt, but, if you put enough force behind it, it's still metal. Even if you're not intending to stab someone, accidents can happen.
Cliff almost kills one of the stars of the movie, and that's why Jenny is fired from the movie.
But even in the middle of getting her fired, it's not like, hey, sorry I got you fired and ruined your big break. He does sort of quickly apologize for, almost killing a dude, but he is still in the middle of her being fired, more interested in being like, hey, let me tell you about this cool jetpack I found. Which, I get it, you found a jetpack, and that is really cool. I'm with you on how cool that is, buddy, but you almost killed a dude. Actually, he almost killed two dudes because he did just collapse like a whole entire scenery wall onto a guy.
The star of the movie?
Causing him to stab another guy. Can you at least wait until we're in the car driving home to talk about how cool your jetpack is?
But Sinclair hears jetpacks. Like, oh, he has my jetpack, or the jetpack that I want.
Again, there's only one. It's not like he's talking about another jetpack.
Yeah. Well, he has the jetpack, and okay, he has my rocket. So we know that he knows this Jenny girl. I'm going to seduce this Jenny girl. And then this guy is going to give me what I want. I love how they set this up that he's barely heard his voice, and because the set crashing on Sinclair doesn't know what the guy looks like. They never actually meet face to face until that dinner scene.
Yeah.
So I do like that it's not that we don't have our hero and our villain face to face just yet.
It's really a good bit of screenwriting how they managed to keep the villain from seeing the face of the hero. The villain is a famous movie star, so the hero knows what he looks like, but the villain only has the hero's name and his relationship to this girl. We have the bit where now we're sending henchmen to the cafe near the airfield to try to find Cliff, and they torture Peavy, or they start to, until they notice Jenny's number written by the payphone.
And then they start thinking it's all an inside job because the girl that the boss is seeing is also this dude's boyfriend. What the hell is going on here?
Yeah, so they think that maybe Sinclair has double-crossed them, not realizing that, they're all looking for the same guy, because they had gone to the airfield to try to figure out, they had tortured and killed one of the guys that worked at the airfield, and they had gotten Cliff's name. So they're all ending up kind of at the same place, just by different means. The mobsters and Sinclair are all looking for the same people. But the sad thing is that Jennifer Connelly is such a good actress, and I realized that this was still early in her career. Relatively. She is given so little to do in this. She just, for a lot of this movie, kind of stands around and is like
the only bit of character they really give her is when Cliff interrupts the date and she gets pissed off. Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, she gets kind of two really good scenes, and one is when Cliff interrupts the date with Sinclair, and she kind of gets mad at Cliff, and there's the whole "you're the rock of what," and she gets kind of one little bit in there, and the other is kind of later on where Sinclair kidnaps her and she's alone in the house and she's trying to figure out how to get out, and she gets her, I finally got to play a scene with Sinclair.
Yeah, when she figures out Sinclair's up to no good, because we literally get the movie equivalent of, does this smell like chloroform to you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a little bit earlier, how he gets her out of the restaurant. But yeah, we get the bit in the cafe where the mobsters are confronting them, and most of the mobsters leave to go confront Sinclair about, like, hey, are you double crossing the boss and everything, but they leave two guys behind. And so here's all these grizzled mechanics and everything who take out these two mobsters. The gun goes off and ricochets into the attic where they've been hiding the rocket. The rocket gets hit, and there's now a fuel leak that they have to patch with gum, and the gum is like a thing.
The running gag of the gum, the lucky gum that Cliff has. He shoots at the beginning of the movie. He puts it on the tail of the plane for luck, which PV rips off, which causes it to crash. PV puts the gum on the rocket for luck because, hey, the last time he took gum off, Cliff crashed. They used the gum to patch up the bullet hole, leaking out the fuel, and saying, if he keeps getting shot, that fuel's gonna explode. Foreshadowing.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing about the gum is kind of an inside joke, because apparently this particular type of gum was thought to prevent seasickness and air sickness.
Beeman's gum.
Yeah, this particular chewing gum at the time. So a lot of pilots would chew that particular brand, apparently, in order to fight it. And it shows up in a lot of movies and stuff that have, like, pilots or seamen, things like that will be like, oh, hey, I think it shows up in like the right stuff as well, about the astronauts. So, they're test pilots and astronauts and all. So it was apparently a thing at the time and persisted through like the 60s or something, that military guys and pilots and stuff would think that this gum helped them somehow. But apparently it was just a superstition and there's not really any like scientific basis to him. So when he's shown to be like really superstitious that this gum, and he's like putting it on the tail fin of the plane and things like that, that it's supposed to be like an inside joke of the pilot doing that. So when he uses it to patch up the rocket, and they're talking about like, well, I hope it's lucky for, rockets too and everything. It's all supposed to be this big inside joke about how this particular brand of gum was this like meme among pilots and astronauts and stuff for years about chew this and it'll keep you safe or keep you from being nauseated or something. Because like, I don't know, apparently the gum was supposed to have like this chemical in it or something that helped your digestion or what, I don't know. Anyway, it was a thing. But I thought it was interesting that like they turned it into a whole plot point in this film.
So going back to Jennifer Connelly, the first scene is when she is confronting Cliff over ruining her date with Sinclair. Second good part is, like you said, she actually smartens up. She actually figures out that that Sinclair is not the good guy he claims to be. He just did chloroform her to put her in his bed. But
well, at first she's like, oh, do you have to drug all your women? Because I don't know how much she's figuring out that he's part of an entire plot. Like, her boyfriend did tell her, like, oh, I'm the Rocketeer, and he's trying to, like, he's working with mobsters to try to steal this rocket. But I don't think, I don't think she had really clued into how, like, absolutely serious it was, as in war effort serious.
She really doesn't see how serious it is until she sees the
radio room.
The radio room.
Yeah.
She starts calling for help, hears Germans on the other side of the radio. She sees a copy of Mein Kampf right next to the radio. She figures it out. Yes. Neville Sinclair, the third most popular actor in Hollywood, as he says, is a Nazi spy. And and
he has a whole speech where he's like,
yeah.
What? A spy? A fascist? Oh, yes, all of the above, Like, they want to make sure that you absolutely get it. Like, yes, I'm the bad guy.
Eventually, Cliff ends up going. Cliff, he tries to get to save Jenny. He gets arrested by the feds. It takes him to Howard Hughes. PBS told him all of the story, what's going on. And then we get that propaganda video about Germans using the rocket to take over the U.S. But he's got to use the rocket one more time. He's got to save Jenny. Sinclair wants to make a deal. The rocket for the girl. But Hughes wants his rocket back. So what do? And then
run away and use the rocket anyway.
Use the rocket anyway. But Cliff does have a bit of a plan, and that is to just tell the truth. Hey, Valentine, the guy you're working for is working for Hitler.
And I love how absolutely incensed Valentine the mobster is, because he's like, I may be a mobster, I may be a criminal, but I'm an American criminal, damn it. You know? Like,
Yeah.
there's that infamous Marvel DC crossover that has Joker telling the Red Skull to, you know, that's something very similar, which is like, you know, I may be a psychopath, but at least I'm an American psychopath, you know. It's like...
And then we get apparently the feds had followed Cliff and are now arresting all of the gangsters. Which leads us to the final battle on the Nazi airship.
Yeah, because even though the feds have showed up, unfortunately, Sinclair called the Nazis too, which is weird because apparently there were just like a whole like German battalion just hanging out in the Hollywood Hills. I guess.
Again,
because there's just like a whole bunch of Nazi soldiers just pop out in the area around the Griffith Observatory, and a fully inflated Nazi Zeppelin just like
flying over the Hollywood Hills.
Yeah, just pops out of nowhere. Nobody saw that, I guess. I don't know where they were hiding that, so yeah.
And there's this really weird beat where the feds and the Valentine gang are shooting at the Nazis, look at each other, and just keep shooting at the Nazis.
Yeah, they were like, well, okay, we can finish our beef later. Right now, there's Nazis to punch, so grab your Tommy gun and go to it. So, yeah, there's this kind of weird, uneasy truce where everybody's just like, yeah, okay, we can deal with that later. Nazis now.
Yeah. Cliff ends up grabbing one of the guns off one of the dead people. I think it's one of the gangsters. I'm not sure. He grabs one of the guns off one of the dead people, flies up to the Zeppelin, and immediately drops the gun when
he brought a gun to a wrench fight because Lothar just like pops out of the top of the airship with a wrench and starts trying to.
Because, you know, in this scenario, it's usually, you know, we find, you know, the Chekhov's gun theory. Everyone knows that. You find the gun, and then the gun gets used later. Now we're going to throw that out completely.
Yeah, the gun just falls over the side of the ship and just falls back down to the ground somewhere, never to be seen again. But, yeah, so Lothar is smart enough, at least in the short term, to tether himself to the ship so that he doesn't also fall off the side.
He doesn't have a rocket.
Yeah, he doesn't have a rocket. So Cliff, you know, rockets around, and he's able to escape the deadly wrench of Lothar.
Knocking him off, knocking him. And there's a nice little joke there, because we go back into the airship as they sing, are you sure this guy's good? Yeah, he's the best pilot in Germany. As the tethered Lothar crashes through the captain's pit, knocking the captain right off the airship.
Yeah. Well, we're not in Germany, so he's not the best pilot anymore. And there he goes. The only thing is that there's another funny thing of there's a guy that's like low rent taught from Indiana Jones. Like, he's got the same little wire rim glasses and the black fedora. It's like he looks like that same character. He's been giving Sinclair a bunch of grief and everything, and like once things start going sideways there and the windows start getting broken and Lothar's hanging off the side and everything,
and
they've lost their pilot down. And he's like, we've got too much weight and everything. You know, the taut looking guy is like, you know, I should have known this would go wrong, you actor. And then like Sinclair just turns around and like kicks him off the airship.
He shoots him. He just shoots him.
Oh yeah, he shoots him and makes him fall out of the airship. And the captain gets like really upset, and Sinclair's like, you know, for the fatherland. And the guy's like, yeah, for the fatherland. Anyway.
So anyway, we get to the climax of this part where Cliff enters the little pit there, the little cabin. As we got ye old standoff where, give me the rocket or I'll kill your girlfriend thing. With no choice, he does give him the rocket, and true to his word, Sinclair lets Jenny go. And then Jenny wants to play hero and fires a flare gun in the cockpit.
Hey, remember what I said in last week's episode about don't put the combustible thing near the stuff that combusts? Yeah, maybe don't do that, Jenny. Smart girl.
Fire in an airship. Oh, the humanity.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I mean, it's an airship full of Nazis, so humanity's on short supply.
Yeah.
What
we haven't said is that the rocket has been shot up quite a bit during this entire scuffle.
Well, the rocket has actually survived much. What actually happens though is that Cliff decides to hand over the rocket, but he uses his thumb to peel off the gum that's been holding the rocket together for the last act of the movie.
So there's just fuel dripping right out of that rocket.
So he's like, yeah, you go ahead and put that rocket on. You fly on out of here, Sinclair. That's fine. Go ahead. And that's what he does.
And he just explodes in a ball of fire and fuel and hits the Hollywood Land sign. If you ever wondered why it says Hollywood and not Hollywood Land, now you know the rest of the story.
There's two really good jokes here. One is when he says, I'm gonna, where's your stuntman now? And Sinclair says, I do my own stunts, which is a bit of an inside joke because Dalton was known as the Bond actor at the time who actually did do most of his own stunts. The other is when he gets out of when he's about to fly off, he says, I'm going to miss Hollywood. And he does. He only hits the land part. he misses the part of the sign that says Hollywood, and he takes out the part of the sign that says land. So it's a nice little visual gag there. I'm gonna miss Hollywood, and he does. But I like that bit. Now comes the part where we have to try to outrun the exploding fire.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny, for setting our airship on fire with the flare gun.
Enter Howard Hughes in a gyroplane.
Well, we get our final stand of Lothar. First off,
yeah.
Lothar is still tethered to the ship. It was a good idea earlier, not so much now, because he can't get the tether off of him in time. Bye-bye, Lothar.
Lothar burns with the airship as it crashes, and Howard Hughes saves the day in a gyroplane.
Auto gyro to the rescue! Keep her steady. We're only gonna have one shot at this.
Every time I see an auto gyro, I think of the Pippi Longstocking movie. I'm sorry. But yeah, they throw a ladder down and Cliff and Jenny grab onto it, and they fly with Howard Hughes in the auto gyro.
Yeah.
I must say that if there's anything in this movie that hasn't aged well, it's the green screen technology.
Yeah, sadly, the special effects in this movie are all kind of not great. It is
like you can see the lines around the actors when they do it, like when Cliff is doing his flying, when we see the final flight with Sinclair, when we see the actors in the auto gyro, the green screen has not aged very well.
Yeah, all of the matte lines are heavily prevalent. It's especially bad in ultra high def. You know, I don't know if they tried to do any high def conversion, but if they did, it did not go well. It's really rough.
We're not gonna get Rocketeer special edition.
Yeah, I don't know if they would bother trying. I mean, I would be for it if they did, but it just right now as it looks very dated. But we get the kind of next day at the diner, and they're all enjoying breakfast or whatever. The news has reported that Sinclair was sadly killed when falling debris from burning Nazis crashed onto his touring car and sadly killed him.
Yeah, even in Hollywood, they have to protect, even though one of the top...
protect the reputation of the film that I'm sure they're desperately trying to cut together from what he was filming. We gotta save the studio.
Yeah.
It would be bad for the studio that has the rights to all of his movies that would like to put out a remembering Neville Sinclair retrospective in theaters now.
Considering the film that Sinclair was filming had him in a mask, they could have easily have another actor do those mask scenes and then just use the unmasked
just
footage.
never unmask him. Just have him masked throughout the rest of the film, yeah. Audiences will never know, right? We get our final little bit where Howard Hughes shows up with a brand new stunt plane for Cliff and leaves the blueprints for a new rocket so PV can build
a better rocket.
But a better rocket for...
Yeah, because we did skip over, but Hughes was very impressed with PV's modifications to the rocket, that it actually flew more steady than it did in test flights.
Yeah.
But Cliff is too busy making out with Jennifer Connelly, and I don't blame the guy.
Yeah, I mean that looks like a thing that you could do. The thing is that it all ends happily, and everybody's safe except for the Nazis, who are all dead, which is fine. There
is set up for a sequel that will never happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, the thing is, though, is I will say that this film, I loved this film so much as a kid. I don't know about you, but I watched this film over and over and over and over as a kid.
I did not, but that was a point in my life where I wasn't really interested in the live action end of Disney. I was always into the animation. But now going back through this podcast, going through these movies, this is one of those good. I can see why this movie has its fans. It's definitely what one would call a hidden gem. It's good. It's not perfect. I feel it's the limitations of 1990s film technology. Like if you were to do this movie today, on the level of that first Captain America movie, it would be amazing.
Yeah, I think though that looking back on it, I remember what I liked about it, and I still like all those same things. However, I remember this movie, like it had probably been 20 years since I sat down and watched this movie, maybe. Mm. I remember this as a Nazi punch-up movie. Seriously, that's what I remember this movie as. I remember this as a guy with a rocket pack fighting Nazis. And when I sat down to watch this movie again, I was like, weren't there supposed to be Nazis in this movie?
And the Nazis don't even show up until the third act.
The Nazis show up like 10 minutes until the end of the movie. There is not even, except for when he takes his girlfriend on a date and there is a newsreel playing before the movie, and it's like, boy, that Hitler is getting up to some stuff in Europe. And that's like the only mention that it is wartime America and there are Nazis. And there's kind of a mention that they're going to see a war picture where Sinclair plays a military guy. Mm-hmm. Okay? That is the only mention that this is wartime until you get to the part where Cliff is brought into Howard Hughes's office, and Howard Hughes is like, hey, we really need that rocket back, and let me show you why. And he shows him the German propaganda film. That's it. That, like, you get that far into the movie before it's even brought up why the rocket is important. And I feel like that's one of the issues as an adult with this movie. Like, as a kid, you're just like, wow, rocket go fast in the air. There's a dude with a jetpack. Yay, you know? Mm-hmm. And like at 11 or 12 or whatever I was watching this movie, I didn't care because it's dude with jetpack and you're never not going to be into that. But as an adult who demands like plot and stuff, you're kind of like, is there a point to him having this rocket other than mobsters want it and maybe he should return it to the rich guy that developed it? Because, like, it is technically stolen property, but also it's a rich guy, so who cares? Mm. You know? Mm-hmm. And as a person who had seen the movie as a kid, I'm like, I really want him to get around to punching some Nazis. When do the Nazis show up again? Because I didn't exactly remember the flow of the story, because, like I said, 20 years or so. So that kind of, I don't know, it kind of annoyed me as an adult. I think if I were to remake the movie for a modern audience, I would get to that bit a lot faster. I think there's a lot of padding in this movie that does not need to be there.
You're right. I mean, we skipped 50% of the movie and none of the plot got lost.
There is, the first 2/3 of the movie are easily just filler. It's really just a guy tinkering around with a jetpack. There is not a lot of plot in there. The love interest is very weakly written, as in they do not give her a lot to do. As a character, you cannot name a lot of character traits about her other than woman who wants to be an actress. Like, you don't know a lot about her beyond that. And I think that that is unfortunate because Jennifer Connelly is excellent and could have done a lot with that character. I think a lot of it came down to the fact that they wanted it to mostly be a vehicle for toys, and then they never got around to making those toys. Yeah. So they wanted to emphasize, hey kids, it's a guy with a jetpack. And they forgot to do the plot.
Like, this is coming off, like we mentioned, it's coming off the 89 Batman movie, which was the big blockbuster hit, but also sold a lot of toys.
Oh, and yeah, so many toys.
And Disney is just looking at, look how many toys we can sell with this superhero.
And I think they could have if there had been more plot.
Yeah.
I think that people forget that things like My Little Pony, for instance, those don't sell a lot of toys because kids look at them and go like, oh, wow, it looks pretty and stuff. It's like, no, it's because little kids sit on the playground and go like, what do you think your cutie mark would be? I think my cutie mark would be this. Do you think you'd be like a unicorn or a regular pony or a Pegasus or a, you know, like there are like knockdown, drag out fights of like what part of the lore you'd be into. Okay. It's not just because it's a toy. It's because there's a story. I know people, and you do too, because you are into this, you know, you don't collect, you know, Transformers or Mighty Morphin Power Rangers or whatever just because it's a cool toy. You will have massive discussions about the story behind that toy.
Even when we were kids and watching stuff like He-Man or Ninja Turtles, it wasn't just the action, it was the characters and the story behind these characters, even if it's just a 30-minute story, but we can understand that story and, okay, this thing was cool. I like this character because this thing happened and it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot, you know, I mean, which Ninja Turtle were you was basically like, you know, your astrology or something, you know, it's like.
First, it was with which Ninja Turtle are you? Which Power Ranger are you? Which color would you wear if you were a Power Ranger?
You know, what color lightsaber would you have? I mean, these are all like, you know, personality tests for millennials. You know, it's what it is. And
we were having those discussions on the schoolyard.
Yeah, we were at the time. I mean, like 80s and 90s schoolyards were just filled with stuff like that. And I think that when you get into generations older than that, that were doing the business end of that, they were like, oh, they like it because it's a piece of plastic with fun colors. It's like, no, there's a story behind that.
People like Batman because then they can identify with Batman in some way.
Yeah.
Could we identify with Cliff as the Rocketeer?
Yeah, and I think that was the thing is, even watching the Rocketeer so many times and stuff, it's a good film. I'm not knocking the film. I'm saying it could have been a better film with a little bit more love and care. I respect what everybody in this film tried to do. What I do not respect is what certain people above them in the business end of the studio disallowed because of, oh yeah, just shove that through and make a cool toy out of it. Because that's never going to work. You know, every time we've seen people try to do that, it never quite turns out the way. Because it immediately is weird and shallow, and people do pick up on that. And I'm not saying that weird, shallow fads don't hit sometimes, because they do. But the ones that actually become huge franchises and stuff are the ones that, you know, kind of do have stories behind them and put in the work. Maybe just give it to people that actually care about it and understand it, and then let them do what they know how to do, and then just trust that, and then we can make a toy afterwards and it'll sell, you know, because that's what happens.
All right, so let's ask the question, Kiki, does the Rocketeer have the magic?
You know, in spite everything, I still like this movie.
I do like this movie. I think this movie deserved better than what it got. It deserves, you know, it's like I said, it's definitely one of those diamond in the rough movies. It's definitely a gem here. You know, if you're one of those people like me who weren't really into the live action stuff, you missed out on a really good movie. And I think more people should go back and give this thing a shot. I think it is deserving, since, you know, apparently Disney still has the rights to this character. You know, give it a shot again, you know, not just as a preschool series, but, you know, give me the 6-episode Disney Plus series on this. Move it up a couple of decades. You could still use Billy Campbell.
You know what? I mean, Billy Campbell still got it, you know? I mean, it's fine. But I would also say more Nazi punching.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, that's what I say about everything, though.
I mean, we've kind of done the trifecta of Nazi punching movies on Disney Plus with the Captain America, Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, and the Rocketeer.
Yeah. You know, if they do something like that, and they've talked about it for a while. I mean, the last time they talked about it was as as recently as 2020.
Mhm.
Or 2020, 2021, they continue to want to remake this in various forms, which I'm not against, but if they do it, maybe do it more in the spirit of the original, if not necessarily the exact. I don't need everything to be an exact remake of the comic. I'm not that person. But at least give it the spirit of what the creator was going for.
Yeah.
So.
And give the love interest a little bit more to do, whether she's Betty or Jenny or whoever. Give her more to do.
Yeah, that would be great as well.
Yeah, so let's move on. Programming note. We are going to attempt to do an extra episode this week on Thor, Love and Thunder. Hopefully it will be out later this week. But if that's not what you're into, if you don't want to be spoiled by the new Thor movie, come back next week. As Kiki, I think it's time to find a little religion as we go to the Whoopi Goldberg movie Sister Act.
Yeah, that was going to be a fun one. I haven't seen that one in quite a few years, but it's another one that was a constant repeat when I was a kid. So we'll see how that one holds up.
Another classic, another home video classic in my household.
Yeah, same.
So we're gonna see how Sister Act holds up next week. Again, stay on the podcast feed. Look for the Thor, Love and Thunder discussion episode, and we will talk to you all next week. Bye.
If you want to help the fight for human rights in the U.S., the American Civil Liberties Union works to protect constitutional rights for all Americans. Their website is aclu.org. If you need reproductive services in the U.S. or wish to donate to those who do, go to abortionfunds.org for more info. The battle isn't over until the last person surrenders. The fight continues. Don't let the magic stop here.
Join our conversation online on Facebook at Rewatching the Magic,
Twitter at Rewatch the Magic,
and of course, new episodes every week at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com.
Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.